evening, everybody, and welcome to week 15 of the Caring View Show. So just to remind you all before we start that the views expressed tonight are of our own and not the companies that we work for. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell, and then you will be updated on everything to do with our channel and YouTube. Please also follow us on Twitter. You will see throughout the show tonight our Twitter handle scrolling across the bottom of the screen. And also we do have a Facebook page as well, which is for anybody who works in health and social care or anybody who supports anybody in health and social care. And it's there for everybody to chat as a useful resource and for us all to support each other. So you'll notice tonight that there is only me and Mark. Now, we were actually both absent last week. Mark was doing a wonderful cruise around the British Isles, and I was up in Scotland on my honeymoon as I got married on the 8th of July. So tonight, Adam is having a well-deserved break. Adam has done absolutely every single show since we started 15 weeks ago. So he's putting his feet up tonight. So enjoy, Adam. You really deserve it. And Dawn, believe it or not, in Norfolk, where Dawn's home is, they have had absolutely torrential rain, and it's caused some problems at the home, and she's had to go back in. So we hope everything's all right with you, Dawn, and we hope everything's all right with the home and the residents. It's the Me and Mark show tonight. So anyway, how is everybody doing with this hot weather? Oh, I don't know about you, but it's not really the best to be working in. And I think it's probably a good point just to shout out to anybody working in the NHS or throughout health and social care, because certainly wearing a face mask all day and then a plastic pinny and plastic gloves is not nice in this weather. So well done to anybody out there who is working in health and social care, looking after all our vulnerable people, who obviously looking after them during a heat wave as well is even more important, and making sure that they're well cared for and hydrated. So well done all of you working out there. So what has happened this last week then in health and social care? Well, obviously yesterday was Freedom Day, as it was named. But really, there's not been a great deal of change as far as we're concerned. There has been 3 new items of guidance come out. So first of all, we had the new guidance on visiting outside of care homes. And really, there's absolutely no difference in this whatsoever. They're still saying that anybody who goes for overnight stays or anybody who has an overnight stay in hospital does still have to isolate on return. We then had the new guidance for visiting inside care homes. And this actually was quite good news, because what they've done now is they have removed the number of nominated visitors. So originally it was 2, that then increased to 5, and now that has been removed altogether. But I think this is just worth saying at the moment that as much as that is really good news, and it's kind of saying that care home visiting should be back to as normal as possible, as long as PPE is being worn, infection controls being followed, and testing is being done. Sadly, in reality, that isn't the news. We're strong supporters of the Caring View with both Rights for Residents and John's campaign. And we know through them and hearing from many relatives that there are still people having timed visits, to the point that we have seen egg timers being used for when 30 minutes is up. Social contact isn't allowed. Pods are still being used. Screens are still being used. So as much as this has come out, we still need it to be enshrined in law. We still need it to be that this should be happening absolutely everywhere. Whereas at the moment, it still is down to individual care home managers and individual providers. So I think it is worth people knowing the reality of what is still happening out there. And then the third bit of guidance that came out is the PPE guidance, of which there's been no changes to at all. But I personally strongly agree with that. We're in a case at the moment where positive cases are going up. Hospital admissions have increased as well a little bit this week. So I think it is really important that we do all carry on wearing our PPE. And I think we've seen that since Boris made the announcement that face masks aren't mandatory anymore, we are seeing more and more companies, large supermarkets, transport companies, all saying that they are still wanting it to be mandatory, which I certainly agree with, but it does put people in a really difficult position, because if it isn't law anymore, it's very difficult to get everybody to comply. And obviously this week, our new, Health Minister for Health and Social Care has actually tested positive himself, despite the fact that obviously he's been double vaccinated. So it just shows that it is definitely still out there. It has not gone away yet. And obviously we've got to make the comment that there was a rather quick U-turn from Boris on whether he was going to self-isolate or not after being in contact. And obviously both him, and I think it's not the Health Minister, can't remember who the other guy is anyway, they are both self-isolating now. So quite a lot been going off. So anyway, Mark, just sort of quickly over to you. I mean, what do you think to all that, all the new guidance and what's happening this last week?
I think, firstly, the guidance got released. Normally it's last minute on a Friday, late at night, and it got released on the day that it was meant to go live, which, for providers, and managers to get their head around and to implement, it gave them no time at all. And it doesn't really surprise me. I think you hit the nail on the head that it's still not law. So I think, changing it to as many visitors and not restricting it, it's only going to be the providers that are already allowing people to come into the services or allowing visits to happen. It's not possibly going to open the doors to those homes that aren't doing it. PPE guidance, I think the only change that I could see was around if you're doing a domestic around somebody. And I still worry that, how are you going to evidence if you were or weren't near that person if they catch COVID from a member of staff? And I think, my advice would be to keep wearing it. It's been proven that it reduces the spread of infection. But yeah, it's definitely been very busy on the guidance front, and definitely don't think that's the last of it. I think it's going to be updated. It needs to be updated. So we'll definitely be seeing more of it in the near future, I'm sure.
We certainly will, yeah. And obviously we've had this new announcement made as well, literally just in the last couple of days, that within the NHS and potentially health and social care as well, staff who are double vaccinated and have been in contact with a positive person and get contacted by a track and trace will not have to self-isolate and will be able to still go into work. Now, I'm in two kind of sort of camps with this. First of all, it kind of sounds a little bit bonkers, the fact that they will be able to go into work, but as soon as they get home, they've got to self-isolate. So they can't go and take the dog for a walk and can't nip to the corner shop, but they can go into work. So my kind of logical brain is like, well, that kind of doesn't make sense. But if I put my manager's hat on, I do understand it, because we've already got such a huge kind of sort of issue in health and social care with recruitment and with staff retention. This is something we're going to be touching on in future weeks as well. And we really do need our workforce there. So I do kind of understand why they are kind of talking about it. I mean, what are your views on it all, Mark?
I don't know how quickly it was rushed through, but it seems like it was rushed through and just put out. And like you've just said, I can see the reasons for it and I can see the reasons against it. And I think the guidance says, if you're looking after clinically vulnerable people, that it doesn't apply to those staff members either. So that's the majority of people working in care homes. I think, each case has got to be risk assessed and signed off by your local public health director. They're not going to have time with all the care homes to personally sign off individual risk assessments. So again, I think that's a piece of guidance that's going to be updated and probably re-released and reviewed very shortly. But I think from talking to a number of the local authorities in the areas that I support, it's too vague at the moment and they won't authorise it to be allowed for care services. So yeah, I definitely think we're going to see a change there.
Yeah, I agree. So anyway, let's move away from COVID for a bit. It seems to just absolutely rule our lives. So tonight, the show is all about dementia. Now, dementia is an absolutely huge topic. Every single one of us will know somebody who has got dementia, whether we work in health and social care, whether it's a neighbour, whether it's a friend. Everybody will know about it. But how much do we really know about dementia? Do we know about the different types of dementia? Has anybody idea how the different types of dementia can affect people? We all think of dementia affecting elderly people, but it doesn't. It can affect young people as well. And do we know what support is out there? You know, we talk about care homes so much, but, you know, a lot of people with dementia want to continue their lives in the community as well. So tonight, that's what our topic is, and that's what we want to find out. So we'd like to bring our two guests in tonight, and we're really, really pleased to have with us tonight Hilary Evans, who is the CEO of Alzheimer's Research. So any questions definitely on dementia, Hilary is the woman to answer them. And also we're very lucky to have joining us tonight Lisa Jones, who is a relative who has both of her parents with dementia in a care home. So coming over to you first, Hilary. So the word dementia covers talk about an umbrella term. So, you know, tell us about dementia. What is it? What does it cover? What are the different types? Who does it really affect?
Hi, so great to be with you tonight. So yeah, when we talk about dementia, we're talking about a condition which affects almost 1 million people in the UK. And dementia isn't just something that happens as you get older. Dementia is caused by disease. So when we talk about dementia, we're talking about a sort of set of conditions. So things like memory loss are sometimes the sort of obvious symptoms, I guess, of dementia that we might all be quite familiar with. But it's ultimately a set of diseases that cause function problems. And so the majority of people with dementia will probably have Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia, but there are a number of other diseases that can cause dementia. And quite simply, I guess it depends often where the disease is in the brain as to which type of dementia they might have and what their symptoms might be. So about 60% of people with dementia probably have Alzheimer's disease. A number of people may have vascular dementia, but there are also things like frontotemporal dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, a number of people with Parkinson's disease will develop dementia. So there are a number of then different underlying causes and diseases, and the symptoms can be quite different. So I think one of the first things to flag is there's no sort of typical type of dementia, and I think it's a very individual disease. It can affect people very differently. In terms of what we know about the diseases that cause dementia, we know a huge amount more actually in the last 5 or 10 years about some of the underlying causes of these diseases, but it's still a condition that is relatively unknown, I think, when we talk about this being caused by disease. Some of the work we did a few years ago, asking the public what they knew about dementia, actually only 1 in 4 people could say that dementia is caused by disease. So the majority of people just think it's something that happens when you get old and granny's forgot where she's put her keys or can't remember if she's had her lunch. And I think that things have moved on, and I think the understanding is starting to change that these are devastating diseases. At the moment, we have no way of stopping or treating or preventing these diseases, and that's something that at Alzheimer's Research UK we're really focused on. But in order to come up with those treatments, we have to really understand the causes and how we can go about altering the progression of this disease.
So you mentioned there that at the moment we don't have any way really of kind of sort of treating it and kind of sort of halting it as such, but yet there are drugs there that have sort of been about. But are we kind of sort of saying that ultimately that there's definitely no cure for it at all?
So at the moment there are a couple of licensed drugs that can help people, particularly in the earlier stages of the disease. But these are symptomatic treatments. They don't necessarily work for everyone, and they don't necessarily work for a particularly long period of time. One of the things that you might have read about in the news in the last sort of 6 weeks or so is in the States, in America, the drug licensing regulator of the US government, the FDA, have licensed the first disease-modifying treatment for Alzheimer's disease. So we are waiting to see further data on the real benefits that has to patients. But I think that's a real hopeful sign of the future, because I think if we can have a treatment that probably we give to people quite early in the early stages of the disease that can halt the progression of Alzheimer's disease and keep some of those maybe symptoms at a really sort of mild level, actually that will make a massive difference. Hundreds and thousands of people with dementia. So I think that's our ultimate goal. I think we also do need to improve symptomatic treatments. So it's a little bit like when we're talking about another disease. So let's talk about cancer. Actually, we have huge number of different treatments and symptomatic treatments. So if you're diagnosed with cancer, the sort of medical pathway is very different. So there's a huge amount of focus on research being part of clinical trials, looking at how we can alleviate some of the symptoms, looking at how we can treat or shrink those tumours. That's the same sort of path that we want to see for dementia. So we want to see people being enrolled in research so that they are able to be part of clinical trials as new drugs come through and benefit from that, but also benefit wider society by greater understanding as to how potential new treatments could work, but also then be offered the right symptomatic treatments depending on their stage of the disease. But the ultimate point we'd want to get to is to have a raft of treatments that could be given early on in the disease that would stop the progression of this disease. That's something that we don't have at the moment. I think that would be much more in the cure space. But in order to do that, we also need to be better at understanding how we detect and diagnose dementia much earlier. So at the moment, we're often diagnosing dementia when someone has got relatively developed symptoms. And actually, one of the things that there has been mounting evidence in recent years is that the point at which we're diagnosing maybe someone on average in their sort of late 70s to 80s, actually the disease has probably been in their brain for 15, 20 years before that.
Wow.
Don't at the moment have any way of, on a sort of population scale, understanding who those people are who may be at high risk. So therefore we could offer brain scans. We could get to the point where we might have a blood test. At the moment we don't have a blood test, but that's something in the next couple of years I think we probably will have. So we can detect those people who are at high risk, who might be at the very early stage of the disease. So that now we're talking about people maybe in their 50s to 60s or maybe even earlier. And actually at that point, we can start offering some of these new treatments that come through. And that would massively change the face of what dementia might look like in the next 10 to 20 years. So I think there is a huge amount of optimism and hope, but we're still a bit away from getting to that point. I think what we understand now is maybe what that roadmap to get there might look like. And I think what we need to see is a real impetus. And I think, you know, the whole sort of health and care and dementia community are completely behind that. And anyone who works or who's looking after or who has family members who've lived with this disease understand how devastating it is. And it's one of those diseases, I think, for a long time has been overlooked. So research has been underfunded. I think that people have sort of seen this as something at the end of life that happens and therefore don't do that much about it. Whereas, you know, I think certainly in the last year, people with dementia have been in the news for all the wrong reasons. I think the impact of COVID on people with dementia has been horrifying on a number of different levels. And I think that we need to kind of use this opportunity to say that we need to change the course of this disease.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listening to you there talking about being able to do brain scans and blood tests is just like, it's just amazing to hear, because the one thing that frustrates me, but obviously it's not that simple, is that so many physical diseases, we are way ahead with it, with cancer screening, you know, breast cancer, cervical cancer, bowel cancer now. It's all just done to absolutely everybody regularly. And obviously with a lot of physical diseases, they are spotted because people begin to feel unwell, or you go to your GP and you have your annual review and you have blood tests done and, you know, things are picked up. Whereas with dementia, there is nothing out there at all. And I actually feel that it is missed because there is this national, almost like a bit of a joke about it, and that sounds the wrong thing to say, but we all kind of say, oh, what am I doing putting that there? I can't remember where I put that, or what have I just come upstairs for? So it isn't picked up. So to hear you say, and I know it's not going to be tomorrow, but to hear you say things like that is really something to cling on to. And it's fantastic to hear that somewhere like Alzheimer's research are working towards something so positive like that, Hilary.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the things that we've been very clear about is we're an organisation who are here for people affected by dementia, and that's pretty much everyone. So there aren't many people who don't know someone who's affected by dementia. And actually, you know, we know that probably 1 in 2 of us is either, you know, we're going to get dementia or we're going to be the person looking after someone else with dementia, unless we can find a way to treat this disease. And, you know, the human cost of this disease, the societal cost and the economic cost are huge. So the cost of dementia to the UK economy is 26 billion. So that's more than cancer, heart disease, stroke combined. And you know, the impact on sort of informal care is vast. So I think that the kind of impetus to come up with those treatments and to change the face of dementia care support treatment has never been greater. I mean, it's an area I've worked in for about 15 years. So I worked at Age Concern and Age UK on more of the care side, and has sort of moved over into more of the medical research. And I think that things haven't shifted in the way that we would have liked to have seen them shift. But I think that we're starting to see some of those breakthroughs, which I think that gives that sense of hope. And that's what people with need to see more than anything else. But I think it's also about informing and educating the public about what dementia is. And I think that one of the things, you know, we run lots of, well, normally run sort of public events and sessions with people who maybe family members have just received a diagnosis, but actually they don't know enough about the disease or where to turn to. And actually, often it gives them comfort to understand physically what's happening in the brain of someone with dementia. Yeah. And some of those personality changes that they maybe have seen over the last 5-6 years that they didn't quite recognize or were really concerned about, and they say, oh, actually that makes sense now, that's why they were acting in that way. Actually, it's because this was happening in their brain, and you know, it wasn't their fault. Or actually the fact that they're losing their temper, or someone who's been very mild-mannered is suddenly now very aggressive. All of those things sort of come into play. And I think that it has been a condition that as a society we haven't really talked about. So there's been a lot of stigma about it. People weren't maybe comfortable talking about it. So we still didn't really understand or have that awareness about the disease. And I think as soon as you start talking about this being a physical disease in the brain, and this affects people in very different ways, there is a number of different diseases that can cause dementia, but it is disease. That changes the face of what we're talking about. And there's no reason why dementia shouldn't be treated differently than other diseases. And just because the majority of people are towards the end of their life is no argument at all. And we know there are, it's a small number of people, but people in midlife who are diagnosed with different types of dementia. So there are people who carry a gene, which means they will develop an early onset Alzheimer's, often in their early 40s. And that's it's a small population of people. But I think that, when some of those people bravely do sort of media work and talk about their, either the fact they know they've got that gene and they're going to develop an early onset dementia, or actually they sort of video diary themselves, and a number of our supporters have done that. And I think that really, really hits home, because it's an incredibly young age for people to be talking about Alzheimer's disease. So I think there are a number of things that have shifted, which is helpful, and people are starting to talk about this. But what we really need to see is is that greater investment in research, and that needs to come from government. We need pharmaceutical industry to really focus on developing these treatments. And, charities like mine are doing what we can, but, the public are incredibly generous in their support, particularly over the last year or two. They've been tough for charities, but we're really trying to ramp up what we're able to commit to in terms of our research spending, but also campaigning to ensure that we can get treatments to patients as quickly as the science can keep up with our ambition.
Yeah. I think this is a really good time actually just to bring Lisa in now, because you kind of sort of mentioned there as well that with dementia, very often the actual person with dementia doesn't recognise and doesn't actually sort of realise that things aren't quite right. It very often is the relatives who pick up the little sort of things that aren't quite right, and it's very often then the relatives who have to then both live with it themselves and deal with it themselves. So Lisa is a relative who sadly not only one of her parents was diagnosed with dementia, but both of her parents were literally within months of each other, and they are both now in a care home. So Lisa, if in just your own words you want to kind of start at the beginning on how did it start, what were the first things that made you think about it, and what journey you've been on?
It's funny listening to Hilary talk. I don't actually remember how it started. I was trying to make some notes as we went along, and I actually don't remember how it started. But it started with my dad. My earliest recollection is that he was doing random things. And my dad's a lovely guy. I mean, Donna, you met my dad. Mild-mannered, calm, lovely guy. You couldn't wish to be, a nicer person, really. And he was just doing weird things. And my mum never mentioned it. My mum didn't really pick up on it. And so we were going on holiday actually with my daughter. And she rang me in the early hours one morning. They were literally going on a plane to Portugal or somewhere. And she was in tears, and she rang me and said, "Grandma and Granddad are fighting. They're arguing in the hall. Granddad's been trying to leave the house. He's set the house alarm off. And he said he doesn't know the number. He doesn't know why it's going off, and he doesn't know the number." And of course, at the time, you think, well, early hours of the morning, a bit groggy, sort of. And I think, well, I'm not sure why he would be leaving the house. And she said she was really worried and she was really scared. So of course I'm pulling my jeans on at 2:00 in the morning, driving across from Sheffield, across to Doncaster at 90 miles an hour, doing that kind of like panic mode. Got there. My dad was really wide-eyed, quite confused, didn't quite know where he was. And of course all the time I'm thinking, oh, maybe he's had a bad dream. Maybe he's just a bit disorientated. I was actually making excuses already, and I didn't even know what I was making excuses for. And I'm saying to him, do you know where you are? How are you feeling? Doing all that kind of stuff. Just really trying to get to the bottom of what had happened. Sort of managed to resolve this situation, and I'm not really sure how. And then let them go on the plane with my daughter. I'm not sure that was probably the best idea I ever had. But it was the start of it that is the earliest thing that I can remember. And the holiday was okay. I think they lost him once or twice. They usually find him by the bar. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, that's where I'd always look for my dad. But it was just little things. And then what they said to me, and it was Ruby or my mum, she said, your dad said, "Where is everybody?" And they were like in the apartment where they were staying. And it was like, well, it's just us. And he was like, "Yeah, but where is everybody? Where are all the other people?" And everybody was a bit confused as to what he meant. And everybody sort of dismisses these kind of things, which I probably would have done as well. And of course, this was the start of us recognising that he was actually experiencing some kind of hallucination. He was seeing people. He was hearing people. He would ask where the noise was coming from, who was here, who was in the room. Because another thing is, are we on a paranormal experience now? It was, you were almost making excuses all the time. for what these things could be. And when I look back at it now, having gone through this, I think that was it. They were probably the first few signs that we saw with my dad, and those little things just happened more and more often. And eventually, I plucked up the courage to talk to him about it, and that was a really hard conversation. And I said, do you think we ought to just maybe go and get you checked out, because I'm a bit worried about you, and you've made a few odd decisions and you've done a few odd things, and maybe we just need to get it checked out. And he wouldn't go, and it was me having to drip feed with him. Every time there was a bit of an incident, every time something odd happened, I would go to him then and say, I think we ought to maybe just go and see the doctor, and let's just make sure everything's all right. I was kind of taking that approach, and eventually he let me take him to the doctor. He blames me now for having dementia, because I took him to the doctor, and if I'd have just waited a week, he's convinced it would have been all right. So that was quite hard to hear when he first said that. I can laugh about it now. There's a lot of things I can laugh about now that I probably couldn't have done then. So we eventually, and I think this was a thing for me. I think I knew, but up to this point, I didn't know about dementia. Dementia was something that happened to somebody else. I didn't know what to look for. I just didn't know. I had no experience of it. So I know you were saying, Donna, that somebody knows somebody who. I didn't. I actually didn't know anybody in that situation. So I rang, I don't know, one of the organisations, I don't know which it was. I remember sitting in Sheffield city centre in tears on the phone to somebody going, I think my dad's got dementia and I don't know what to do. And the person on the phone was lovely and very supportive and very caring, but said, we can't really talk to you until you've got a diagnosis. And I was like, I don't know where to go. And I think that's the thing for me. I didn't know where to go. It took me a lot of fighting, a lot of arguing, a lot of struggling to actually get Dad to be able to go for the appropriate scans and to have those conversations. And I think if it hadn't been for me being the way I am and really sort of fighting, constantly on the phone to the GPs, what's happening with this? We haven't heard anything, what's going on? And I had to really push that through in order for him even just to get any kind of a diagnosis. And when the diagnosis came, it wasn't a shock, but they said, Lewy body. And I went, what? What is that? It's like, I've never heard that phrase in my life. And I had no idea what that meant. I didn't understand the implication of it. If I'm really honest, I probably still don't now, because there's only so much research that you can actually do before you start going, I'm not sure I want to hear anymore, because this is actually a really difficult journey on its own anyway, without knowing potentially what's coming. And so I started to Google it and look it up and do all that sort of stuff. And that was probably my first real foray into starting to get to grips with what this diagnosis meant. And to be fair, they put Dad on some medication, pretty much almost straight onto quite a high dose, and it was the highest it could be. And that staved things off. We stopped the hallucinations, we stopped the sort of random voices and things like that. So I kind of sat back at that point and thought, we're okay. Yeah, no, that wasn't the case at all, because it didn't take long before obviously he'd been at that high dose, and then it just stopped being effective. And by this time, I think nobody had really noticed that my mum had started, again, little odd things, little telling me the same thing lots and lots and lots of times, but literally within an hour, she'd ring me and say, oh, you never guess what's happened. I'm thinking, well, you told me this an hour ago. And so it was so with my mum, it was a very different experience. And of course, everybody's been focused on my dad. Everything was about Dad. He'd got the diagnosis. He was in that situation, and we were all focusing on him. And we managed, and I say it was managed because what it felt like, and this is no disrespect to any of the sort of medical services, but it felt like you've got a diagnosis, off you pop. I felt completely abandoned. I felt like it was down to me to support them. It was down to me to find out what I needed to know. Everything felt like it was down to me. Once we got that diagnosis, it really felt like we were just left to it. And when I say we, I actually mean me. I have a brother, but he lives in Canada. So, it's me. Working full time. I've got 2 young children, all my own responsibilities and my own life. And then suddenly I've got this on top. And we managed that situation for quite some time before I'd really got to the point where I actually couldn't manage anymore. I was getting 2 and 3 phone calls a day. I was getting calls at work. My dad would ring and say, "There's an old lady in my house." And I'd be like, "It's your wife. It's Mum." And he'd be like, "No, that's not Brenda." And I was like, "It is." And my mum would then ring me at random times in the middle of the night. "Talk to your dad, will you? I don't know where he is." We did all the kind of things that would probably be, I think it now, probably a complete waste of time, but I'd written a note and put it on the wall. "Yeah, Alan, this is your house. Brenda is your wife. Lisa is your daughter." And literally all these prompts for him. I'd written notes on doors so they knew which room he needed to be in. The bathroom, I'd taken photographs. Literally, I'd done shed loads of stuff, but because I was just trying to research what can I do, because it was me. It was just me. And it took a long time for us to get any kind of professional support. And I don't even remember how I got that. So we actually got in touch with the Admiral Service, the Admiral nurses. No idea how I found out about that. And I had a support worker for a while. But she was just somebody who would ring me and just say, "How's things?" I'd then spend an hour going, "And then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened." And we'd tell some funny stories because, of course, as Donna said, there were funny things that happened. Although, to be fair, I think if you haven't got a sense of humour going through this, you really and truly are shocked, because some of the stuff that has happened, if you didn't laugh, you would cry. You'd never get back up. But so we'd go through this it was quite a cathartic process every time she rang, but actually it never moved us anywhere. And eventually, I think we probably got a bit too much for her, and she didn't really know what to do with us. So we got moved on to a nurse, an actual Admiral nurse, and that was probably the best thing that ever happened to us. Our Admiral nurse is an angel, and I absolutely could not have got to this point. As difficult as it's been, I could not have done this without her, because she is just fantastic. And I couldn't have done this without her. But it took a long time to get to that point where I could actually get somebody to help me and manage the appropriate, services that they might need. But my mum was a different kettle of fish. I think she was very much, because she was supporting my dad. I think they were sort of like hiding and masking each other's dementias, so nobody really knew how bad it was. And eventually, I managed. My mum was actually under a geriatric consultant because she keeps falling. And with Mum's permission, I said to the consultant, "I'm concerned about her memory." I said, "So although you're treating her for falls and those kind of things, I'm concerned there's been a few incidents." And then that's what got the ball rolling for the diagnosis for my mum. And she was diagnosed with, because I have to have them all, I mean, might as well. So I've got a dad with Lewy body, and I've got mum with vascular and Alzheimer's, so a mixed dementia. So yeah, it's like, what else can you throw at me? And her short-term memory is just shot, absolutely shot. And it was those kind of things that made me go, something's not right here. And then obviously that then set off a chain of events where she was going for brain scans and so on and so forth. And we got a diagnosis for her just before Christmas. And And literally, like last year, my dad was still driving. They'd pop off to the shops and leave the house unlocked because they couldn't find the keys. And they'd be like, it was like, what? They've got 4 sets of keys in the house. I used to go down. Well, Donna knows this because Donna's had to come and find them. And we'd go and find all the house keys and we'd hang them on the hook next to the door. Little note, keys go here. 4 sets of house keys. And literally within 12 hours, I get a phone call. Lisa, we can't lock the house. What do you mean you can't lock the house? We've got no keys. I'm like, I came down less than 12 hours ago and found you 4 sets of house keys. Yeah, but they've all gone. And it's like, and they would literally, they'd go to the shops because they couldn't find the house keys to lock up. So they would just go to the shops. Well, they knew they'd be all right. Be all right. Because burglars don't come at that time, do they? And it's really like the crazy stuff that they did was just remarkable. And like I say, my dad was driving. And I actually had to contact the DVLA and ask them to stop him driving. And it wasn't because he couldn't drive. It was because he was making inappropriate decisions. And at one point, he, at 2 a.m, when we had the really, really bad winter, sort of January time, and it was minus something ridiculous, he actually took the car out, so backed it out of the garage, in that thick ice. My mum helping him out, left a bit, right a bit, like you do at 2 a.m. And then my dad drove the car in those kind of conditions to the paper shop, and then he rang me then when he got back at 3 a.m. because it was shut, and he was very unhappy about it because the paper shop was shut. So for me, it was around the decision making was, just wholly inappropriate. I mean, who would do that at 2 a.m? And so really at that point, I just lost the will to live, really. I just thought, I can't do this anymore. They're not safe. They were not safe with each other. They were just not safe, and they were masking each other. And that became really apparent when we actually separated them for one night. And it was awful. It was absolutely horrendous. Sorry, I feel like I've really gone on, and I could go on for a long time. But I brought carers in, and they didn't want the carers there, but I needed that peace of mind. So we paid for them to come 4 times a day. But the carer would come in and would say, "Is everything all right?" And my mum and dad would go, "Yes." So the carer would leave. And then literally within maybe an hour, they were fighting and arguing. My mum was, saying that she wants to die. She doesn't want to live with him. He's a nightmare. He's this, that, and the other. And it's like, then I'd get a phone call. So I'd go down and she'd be telling me, I want a flat. He'd buy me a flat because I'm not living with him anymore. And then literally within 20 minutes, nobody could remember why they were arguing. All this drama had kicked off. The carers had gone. And I was left picking up the pieces again. And it became apparent that actually that was for me. Putting those carers in was for me, because I needed to know that every now and then somebody had just got their eye on them. I had 3 cameras in their house, and I was monitoring them. I was watching this unfold in front of me, and it was just horrific, absolutely horrific. I contacted people like the mental health crisis teams, at the local council. I'd be on the phone to them going, I don't know what to do. I've got this situation going on and I don't know what to do. And you get passed from, to maybe an emergency social worker or something like that. But nobody that could actually help me there and then in that crisis point. That's what I needed. I needed somebody at the end of the phone saying, try this, do this. What happens if you? And I didn't get that support at all. And so for me, I think having somewhere to go to say, I'm in a crisis and I need some help, and to have somebody with some knowledge and some expertise at the end of the phone with, who can deal with dementia, because it is enormous. My dad's behaviour is nothing like my mum's behaviour. So I was dealing with this as a complete novice, trying to be everything to everybody. And that's for me what is needed. Somebody who can be at that crisis point at the end of the phone, because that's what I needed. And then I had to make the decision to put them into care. Sorry, I said I wouldn't do this. We had a fight in the garden, and the next door neighbour rang me and said, your mum's outside in the snow. She's only got a blouse on, your dad won't let her in. So suddenly I'm in Sheffield driving, at 90 miles an hour down the motorway and trying to deal with that situation. And by the time I got there, they were both sat on the settee. Like everything was fine. And at that point, I just made the decision that they were not safe to be with each other. And I took my dad into Broomgrove. And when I got back, my mum said, where's your dad? And I said, I've taken him into the care home because you two just need some separation from each other because you're just not safe. She had no recollection that I'd taken him into care. And when I went back the next morning, she was up and about and said to me, I've been looking for your dad all morning and I don't know where he is. And I just thought, well, this is way worse than I thought for my mum. And what we realised was that the two of them functioned together as dysfunctional as it can be. They need to be with each other because they are each other's support network. And so I took my mum into care at that point as well. And on Friday, it's just gone, we had the best interest meeting and I permanently placed them in care, which was probably the single hardest decision I've ever had to make in my life. But I have to keep them safe, and they're not safe out of that environment.
I mean, Lisa, it's so hard listening to you. And I know that, I've played so much of that through with you, and to hear you just kind of sort of, relive it again. But I mean, going back to you, Hilary, does that sound uncommon to you? Does it sound really common? What help and support is out there? Because the thing that really stands out to me from Lisa's story is, who is it that we turn to? Because first of all, you've got to try to get that person with dementia to actually go to the GP. And I think the biggest thing about anybody with dementia, and Adam has actually put in our chat tonight that he's got two grandparents, both with dementia, and that they're both very resistive to any kind of external support, even from family members, just resistant to help, going to the GP, having carers in or anything. So, what kind of tips can you give to even get that process started? And, who is it that we can turn to in that time of need?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very familiar story. I mean, it reminds me of my grandparents. I had three grandparents, all ended up with different forms of dementia, but my grandma and granddad both had Alzheimer's disease and one with vascular dementia, and a similar battle for my parents. And this was in the sort of mid-late 90s. And things haven't changed a huge amount, and if anything, have probably got worse. And I think that what we need to do is to prioritise social care, and it needs to have parity with healthcare, and needs to be a properly funded system, so that the minute you have concerns about a family member or someone needs help, or you have a diagnosis of dementia, there is a really clear care pathway. There's a really clear diagnosis pathway, which hopefully further down the line involves treatments and monitoring and the ability to take part in research and all the things that I've sort of talked about previously. But I think at the moment a lot of it does fall to informal carers, and that often is family members and people around who essentially have to fight for either the diagnosis and getting someone in front of a GP to start with, which I think time after time is probably one of the hardest steps to take, particularly for family, and particularly I think when it's your parents. But I think we need to ensure that there's proper social care, so that you have got someone to go to, and you've got proper care at different stages. And I think that, you know, as we've said tonight, there's no sort of one typical dementia, because there are a number of different diseases that will cause dementia. And even within that, there's lots of variations in terms of how someone will cope with that disease. The brain is an incredibly complex, clever organ, and can cope with these diseases very well for quite a long time, which is why often, essentially, the sort of pathologies in the brain have been there for 20 years, and it's only at crisis point when the brain can't cope anymore we see the symptoms. And so the brain continues to sort of cope as much as it can for as long as it can, which is why often there are sort of glimmers of that person that you recognised, or that might seem okay to the carers or people popping in, and then you kind of sit there for a little bit longer and realise, hang on a minute, there's lots of things going on here that you spend a bit more time and suddenly you're sort of horrified that actually everything's falling apart, when on the surface of it, that person might look okay. So I think, you know, in order to get the proper care and support, this system has to be properly funded, and the you know, the amazing care workforce that we've got need to be, you know, I think need to be on a parity with other sort of care professionals, but we need to ensure that we have that care and support there for the people who are impacted by these diseases, and that often is the, you know, is the family, and it's the people around the person who has got say Alzheimer's disease. And actually it's the person with Alzheimer's disease that often is the one that doesn't really know what's going on, and actually is probably in the least stressful position. This is a disease that affects, you know, the family and the people around the person with the condition probably more than any other disease I can think of. And so, you know, we need to make sure that we've got that support. There is some amazing care worker, there's some amazing charities, there are support out there, but you have to know where to look and you have to fight for it, and that shouldn't be the position that you're in. You shouldn't be in a position where you're sort of given a diagnosis, maybe a few leaflets, and then things disappear. And I think for a lot of people that's their experience. And I think, you know, the late Sir Terry Pratchett was a patron of our charity, and he had Alzheimer's disease, and he previously had cancer. And I think he said he had his cancer diagnosis and people came running. There was health services, there was treatments, family were there. He got an Alzheimer's diagnosis and he just said he felt completely alone. There's no one knew what to say to him. He didn't know what was going on. He was terrified, and he just felt it was just him alone with no real support, nowhere to go. You know, obviously he was in a position that he could try and do something, and he donated $1 million to Alzheimer's Research UK, and he threw himself into talking about his condition and wanted to try and break down some of the stigma, and I think sort of took some solace in that, and obviously could sort of support some of his care. But I think that you know, for the majority of people, to feel like that when you're diagnosed with this kind of disease, or the family to feel like that, we shouldn't be in that position in this day and age. And I think that it's pretty shocking that we are. And obviously we're waiting in the next day or two to hear from the government in terms of what as the reform of social care funding would look like. But I think we've been waiting for a government to come up with that for about 20 years. But I think that, you know, a fully funded social care system is a start. But I would say, you know, there are fantastic charities who focus on care and support. There's Alzheimer's Society, the Admiral Nurses, I think, are a wonderful organisation. It's now called sort of Dementia UK, but they obviously provide an incredible service. And I think that you know, there is a lot more information out there, and I would urge people to sort of go to some of the charities for support. I think that there's a big education job in terms of supporting our GPs and our clinicians to diagnose quickly and properly. I think historically, because we haven't necessarily had treatments, sometimes we've seen reluctance of GPs and others to maybe refer people or make those diagnoses as early as that they can. I think that will start to change where there are treatments and things that we can do for people with dementia. So I do think there is sort of light at the end of the tunnel there, but I think it's it's a really tough, harrowing experience. And I think for families, and I saw it with my own family, I think it's a traumatic one. Even if you've got all of the right support in place, and not having that right support in place, and not having that kind of comfort of knowing that there are treatments that can either alleviate some of the symptoms or help that individual in terms of some of the things that they're going through, I think then is that kind of double blow. So I think that, things will change, and I really hope that in the next few years, a diagnosis of dementia won't be what it is today. And I do hope we will have a better care and support framework. And I hope that the research is starting to deliver. But I do think certainly in the last 5 years we've seen some big breakthroughs in our understanding or ability to diagnose. I think the benefit of sort of diagnostics, of scanning, of sort of digital of data are all coming and playing a part in this, as well as then pharmaceutical companies investing and looking at what those sort of pharmacological interventions might be. So I think the combination of those things will enable us to have a better care pathway for people with dementia, because once you've got treatments, you have to then continually look at what treatments, how best we can support people. And ultimately what we want to try and do is to enable people to live a long, healthy later life, rather than be living with this disease for a number of years and in a very difficult situation for their families. So I think one of the things that I would encouraging people to do is to continue to campaign to support the organisations who are there advocating for people with dementia, but sort of don't lose sight of that there is that hope out there, and there is support if you fight for it and look for it. And I know it shouldn't have to be the case, but try not to do this on your own, because I think it's really tough.
I think it was really interesting picking up what you said about the sort of the stigma around it. My mum is embarrassed by that. When she got that diagnosis, her conversation with me was, don't tell anybody, I don't want people to know. And I said to her, if you had cancer, right, we would not be having this conversation. We'd be going through a treatment plan. We'd have a look what was happening. There would be a route. And I said, so if this makes you feel any better about it, let's call it cancer of the brain. I said, because if that makes you see it in a different light, but her initial reaction, and she still struggles with it now, to be fair, her initial reaction is that she is embarrassed by that diagnosis. And that is really sad.
Yeah.
I think one thing I've seen is the amount of people that once they get the diagnosis, their support bubble, their friends that they've had for a number of years just seem to slowly, well, I say slowly, but very quickly drop off. They stop visiting. And I think that's because they don't know the conversations to have, what to say anymore. And I think that's a real shame for the person living with dementia, because then it just makes them more isolated.
Yeah. So when I think we've got some visitors who started to go and visit my mum and dad, because obviously they've not been allowed to. And I'm having sort of coaching conversations before they go to say, look, my dad will just talk random stuff at you. He's very happy in his place and he's okay. But he will just talk to you about anything and everything, and it will be completely inappropriate to what you're talking about, but that's okay, just roll with it. Whereas my mum has a very different, she's very emotional, she can be very angry, and so I'm having to coach people. So somebody with very little experience is now coaching other people to handle that situation for when they go in. And that is hard to do, but obviously it helps them.
Yeah. I mean, Mark, do you have any kind of sort of final questions or anything for either sort of Lisa or Hilary?
I think I've got one question. One thing I wanted to touch on was the diagnosis point. Having a background with working with people with a learning disability, I cannot tell you the struggle it has been to get people diagnosed with dementia and living with a learning disability, because so many times the doctors just say, no, it's not, it's the learning disability. I've even heard they've got Down syndrome, there's no point. And I think there is a point, because there's extra support out there. Like, you can't just pin it down on the learning disability or the Down syndrome. One thing I wanted to speak to you, Lisa, about, and I don't know whether you're still doing it or not, is the Share the Orange campaign. Are you still doing that?
We are, yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you wanted to talk about that quickly, because we can share the links on our Twitter, and I'll put the link on here while you talk about it, because I think that's actually a really good initiative.
Yeah, so Share Orange campaign is something that we've been running for about 5 years now. So Share the Orange there's been 3 films, so we'll share the link, and we've had 3 different celebrities fronting it. The last one was Samuel L. Jackson, who's had, I think, 5 members of his family have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And it's called Share the Orange, and are 3 different films that feature literally an orange. So they feature an orange because the weight of a healthy brain versus the weight of a brain of someone who dies with Alzheimer's disease, the difference in weight between those 2 brains is the weight of an orange. Because essentially, by the time that someone with Alzheimer's disease has passed away, their brain has shrunk so much that that's the brain mass that they've lost. So this just shows that it's a physical disease. So we wanted to find a way of talking about why this is a physical disease, and wanted to do so in a way which wasn't pictures of brains and too medical. So that's hence why we've talked about an orange. So it's a different way, I guess, of telling that story, but also then had people fronting it. We had Christopher Eccleston fronting one as well, but people who've been affected by dementia or their family or cared for someone with dementia. So yeah, that's been a different sort of public campaign and getting people to talk about dementia in a different way. I think the point around diagnosis is it's really challenging. So one of the things that we've been working on with the NHS is to try and drive up diagnosis rates, which was going relatively well pre-pandemic, and obviously the last 18 months there's been a real setback in diagnosis rates. I think that I mentioned before, GPs often, I know there's been reluctant to diagnose for a number of different reasons, which absolutely shouldn't be the case. I think that having treatments will certainly help. But I do think that people deserve a correct diagnosis, and a correct diagnosis of the type of dementia and the causes. And I think that should then come with then a care and treatment pathway. And I think if you don't have that diagnosis, you can't even access the care and support that is there. But I do think it's a real challenge. And, we know that, a high proportion of people who are living with Down syndrome will end up with Alzheimer's disease, for example. So they absolutely should be getting a correct diagnosis and the support that they need. And we're way behind in how we do this. And I think one of the medical challenges here is that it often falls between old age psychiatrists and neurologists. And then if you add, maybe people with learning difficulties or younger people, then it's fighting about who gives them that diagnosis. And so actually we need to join up some of these services, because people essentially are sort of passed from pillar to post in the health system trying to get that diagnosis, and that shouldn't be the case. But as we are developing new ways of diagnosing, so I mentioned blood tests, so developing a biomarker for Alzheimer's disease. So if we can have a simple blood test that could show what kind of dementia someone has, that's going to be a really easy way to diagnose it. At the moment, it's a combination of brain scans, cognitive function tests. It takes a long time. It's quite a crude way of diagnosing a really complex brain disease.
It's been absolutely fantastic listening to you. Lisa sadly disappeared, but I think we need to round it up. We are just over our hour, but I think I want to end on a positive note. So as much as it's been harrowing listening to Lisa's story, and we can talk a lot of negatives about how difficult it is to diagnose, I think we need to hold on to those positives, that things are going in the right direction, that we are waiting to hear from the government about reform of health and social care. Let's hope after 20 years it is time for that to happen. Let's hold on to those facts that Alzheimer's research are doing such amazing stuff to try to get this early diagnosis. And I mean, if people just sort of, finally, Hilary, if people actually come to your website, is there kind of advice on there for people of where they can go sort of for support and everything? So I think that's the biggest thing that really people are wanting, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So there's loads of information on our website. So go search for Alzheimer's Research UK. We have an information guide which you can find online, and we can post out to people. So there's telephone numbers on our website, and that has, I think it's who to go to for support. And so that has lists of lots of different organisations who you can go to for support, as well as a lot of information about the different diseases that cause dementia, how you can get involved in research, so signing up to research programmes. But there's a lot of information for people who are looking for it, as well as how you can get involved in some of the campaigns and projects that we're running as well.
That's fantastic. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. I think
pleasure.
Learned so much from you, Hilary, and it is a topic that we could go on about. And like I say, I think it affects so many people, and there's so much of it going on in people's own homes and behind doors that that we don't know about at all. So just finally, Mark, over to you. Are we all going to be back together again next week then?
Yes, I hope so. Just touching on those guides, I have used those guides, and I can tell you that they're some of the best ones that I've come across. I always highlight people and signpost them to them. So definitely, if you need some support or information, then I would definitely have a look at them. Really hoping that next week we'll be back as a 4. We've got a young author on that has written a book about when they grow up, they want to be a carer, which made the headlines last week. So really looking forward to having her on. I hope it'll be the 4 of us. You never know, but looking forward to it. So
so thank you so much, and thank you so much to Lisa. I know she's disappeared, but thank you so much for being so open and honest and telling your story that I'm sure rings true with lots of other people out there, and hopefully will help other people realise that they're not on their own. So it's good night from all of us now, and we will see you next week. So bye.
Bye.
Thank you again for joining us tonight on The Caring Review. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and whilst you're here, check out some of the other videos that we've got up online. If you've got something that you think may be interesting for us to discuss, or if you want to guest spot with us, then drop us an email to thecaringview@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter, find us on Facebook. All the information is down there in the description box. But until then, have a good evening, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.